And I think doing this interview is great because it kind of helps me think about those things a little bit more. And I really am blessed, obviously to have the father that I have. And so being able to learn from him, and I know that he did an amazing job, and I'm just trying to, learn from others, be around, dads that are trying to lead their families well. And so I think that absolutely I have room to grow, but there's a lot that I learned from my dad that I really do incorporate into my own family life. Like my dad doesn't really talk a whole lot about his feelings. He never really did, but I knew he was there for me, and I knew that he loved me with his actions a lot more than his words. That I really appreciated about my dad, because he didn't really get angry first. I've never, again, seen him really riled up, but like I knew, I felt guilty if I knew that I was doing something to disappoint my dad, just because I knew he didn't get riled up and I didn't want to disappoint him. And yeah, there were consequences, I got in trouble, but first it was always the relationship.
Welcome everybody. Today we are at another episode of Father's Influence. My guest, Brian, today, he has his story of fatherhood with his father, and now he, as a father as well, has a story of parenting, practicing fatherhood. So, thank you for joining us. Let's dive in. And as usual, I ask you to introduce yourself so people who will be watching, they will have at least first impression of who our guest today is.
Yeah, sounds good. My name is Brian. I actually grew up in Southern California, spent a lot of my childhood there, kind of going to the beach, always outdoors, playing sports and getting involved with stuff like that. And then went up to Washington State, spent a number of years there for high school. That's where we were at. And then, believe it or not, came over here to college and went to a university here in Tennessee. And so a little bit of all over the place, but always have been really active, love to do things outdoors, really love to get out and wakeboard and snowboard. And then I guess my main sports as a kid probably were basketball and football, or American football, as we like to say sometimes. And so just real active, in terms of lifestyle. And yeah, a little bit about me.
Do you have any other hobbies?
Other hobbies, I was really into maybe biking or, different things like that as my son's kind of gotten a little bit older. And so now we're spending some time playing more soccer because he's really been getting into that. So we love being able to do that, and hiking. So anytime we can get in the mountains, we lived in Montana for a while as a young family, and we'd love to get out and just kind of explore the trails and stuff like that. And I miss going to the beach. If I could go to the beach a little bit more and surf and do stuff like that, I'd love to. So other than that though, we just, anything outside is good. Fresh air.
I have a challenging question. What do you consider the biggest achievement of your life?
That is an excellent question. The biggest achievement of my life, I like to think, is still out there.
Okay, good.
So far, it's probably getting married, raising a couple of kids, just doing my best to lead them well, as a father, and continue to learn and be there for them as best I can.
What is your biggest challenge or biggest regret of your life?
Biggest challenge. So we do... I'm a chiropractor, and so always for us, it's been we've moved around a lot and had to start over a lot. And so when that happens, that's probably been the biggest challenge for us. Our kids lived in 5 states by the time they were 5, both of them. And so a lot of moving and a lot of starting over in different places. And so the last move was probably one of the hardest transitions, just because they were a little bit older and had some friends that we left, and so that was pretty tough. And so that's probably been the biggest challenge that we've experienced as a family. Biggest regret. Mistake? I
Sounds
think
like people were, I can relate to this person because I had similar situation.
Yeah. I think it goes along that same vein, actually. Early on in my career, if I were to go back and counsel myself, we'd started a practice, believe it or not, here. But we went through kind of a rough patch where my wife is Canadian and from Canada, and it was culture shock, and there's a lot of different things that we had a hard time adjusting to with married life and then also starting a practice. And so if I could go back to the younger version of myself, I would have probably advised to just be a little bit more tactful with what I was doing with work, and then also our living situation at the time and how we approached it, just because it was more challenging than it needed to be. And I think it would have set us on a little bit different trajectory. But I do believe that everything happens for a reason, and I feel like we both know that we've grown a lot in our journey, and it's challenged us in unique ways to become the people that we are today. And so I think that's also been huge. So I don't know if I would change anything. We've talked about that before, my wife and I. Well, would we change anything if we could go back? So I don't think we would, just because we've learned so much and we've met so many good people along the way. But we certainly would have been in a different position, at least with like the work and the finances and all that stuff being a little bit more manageable and a little bit easier. And so that's certainly been a challenge for us recently.
Now let's talk about your father. What is the earliest memory that you have about your father?
Oh, man. Playing sports was probably a big part of what I remember, and then camping trips. My dad was pretty big into camping. Again, we grew up in Southern California, and so it seemed like any sport that I wanted to play, like he would be involved with. But I remember as a little kid going to watch him play basketball. And that's probably, why I was big into basketball as a kid too, because that's one of the earliest memories I have of my dad, is probably going to watch the games that he would play, whether it's league or church league or something like that.
Tell us a little bit more about your father. Who he was while you was growing up, and maybe who he is right now, so we would kind of like distantly be introduced to him.
So my dad was definitely very even keel, like nothing really rattled him too much. And so, but he was always there for us and just really supportive. And so I don't remember my dad ever really getting angry. Mm-hmm. He would always, even if I got in trouble, he was the one that was really calm. My mom would get after us a little bit more, but my dad was always kind of that steady, calm presence, in the room. And so, and then, just really supportive with the things that we wanted to do. If we wanted to play basketball, he was there in it. If we wanted to play any other sport, that even if he hadn't done it, he was going to learn how to do it, so that we could do it together as a family. And I remember him just fixing everything. So like if the VCR broke, he'd pull it all apart and fix it. If the washing machine broke, I remember pieces of the washing machine taken apart to the point where I didn't know you could take a washing machine apart that many pieces, fixing the one thing in there that was broken, and then like watching him put it all back together. And so he would always take really good care of his things. He would fix everything, as it broke. And I remember we had vehicles with 400,000 miles on them before, he'd get rid of them. And his, to this day, has over 400,000 miles on it, I think, and he's still driving that vehicle. But other than that, just, just excited about, family. He put his family first, for sure. And we could really tell. Like, my dad doesn't really talk a whole lot about his feelings. He never really did. But I knew he was there for me, and I knew that he loved me with his actions a lot more than his words. And so, like, he'd never really say, I love you, traditionally or anything like in that sense. But it was always like acts of service, and, he would just kind of do anything for us. And you could tell that, he loved us just because of the way that he acted and put us, first for everything.
What was his occupation when he was growing up? So
when he was in California, he was a biomed tech. Mm-hmm. So he would fix everything in the hospitals and all the equipment he took care of. And so probably went along the lines of why is he fixing everything in the house too. And then when we moved, he was actually a telecommunications manager. So took care of phone systems for university, up in Washington. That was actually one of my first jobs, was working there and punching down phone lines. And so that was when I was, I think, 14 or something. We started in there. And so that's what he did when I was growing up.
I have right away a practical question. Since you said your father liked to fix things and taking good care of his stuff.
Yeah.
I know that kids, they like to mess up quite often.
Yeah.
What did he do when you mess up something, he likes to fix, so he would go and fix constantly after you, or what was his approach?
I think his approach was helping me learn from the situation. So if I broke it, like there was definitely a level of responsibility that I had to fix it, but he was always willing to help. So even if I got in trouble and there was a consequence, he was always willing to step in and help me out as long as I was willing to do the work. And sometimes I'd have to put forth a little bit more effort, or in certain cases, I know we talked about this a little bit, but I had my license, was driving a car, and it was very early on when I got my license, took a corner too fast, and we lived in the middle of nowhere. So I ended up in a wheat field, kind of, bouncing through it at about 40, 50 miles an hour with a couple of my friends. And didn't end up telling my dad at first when I got home. Long story short, he certainly found out, what had happened. Ended up having a laugh about it because, he was adventurous in his day too. And he ended up telling me some of his car stories, which kind of helped. But he definitely made sure that I was the one to help fix it, even put forth a little bit of my own money that I had working to, help remedy the situation. But always good natured about it. It's like, glad you're okay. We can have a laugh about it, but, make sure to make things right. And I think that's something that I really appreciated about my dad, because he didn't really get angry first. I've never, again, seen him really riled up, but like I knew, I felt guilty if I knew that I was doing something to disappoint my dad, just because I knew he didn't get riled up and I didn't want to disappoint him. I think that was just part of his calm personality, is just being able to relate the value and the importance of those things, but even without having to like raise his tone or his voice, because I knew what I had done was wrong, and I knew there was going to be a consequence to fix it. But when I didn't tell my dad about those things right away, it wasn't like he got really mad that I broke the car. He was just maybe disappointed I didn't come to him first, because he wanted to help me fix it. And then he wanted to know that I was okay. And he wanted to make sure that he knew that that he was there for me more than anything. And yeah, there were consequences. I got in trouble. But first, it was always the relationship.
Why do you think you didn't go and tell him right away, knowing your father, knowing that he's not harsh person, knowing that he's not going to punish you severely? Why wouldn't you go and talk to him?
I think in that instance, it was because I'd never done anything like that before.
On such a scale.
Yeah, I think it was just a bigger scale. Like I knew I'd kind of wrecked the car a bit, and I just gotten my license. And I was like, oh no, I want to be able to drive, and I didn't know what to do, and I was nervous. And even though like his example before that was, good, and I definitely could have talked to him about it, I think it was just that it was, really early on. And funny story, when it was snowing, I also ran the car into a curb when I was trying to, handle the car in the snow and figure all that out. That time I told him right away. And
that was after
this one. And so when I went to him at that point in time, like, Dad, yeah, I hit the curb and did this. And so, again, he was he was fine with it. He's like, you got to learn how to drive in the snow. Let's fix the car. But then like he would take me out to do it, right? He'd go somewhere else, or we'd do it not just on a side street, but maybe in the parking lot or something like that. Because he told me some crazy stories about how he had, driven his cars when he was younger. And so I feel like he just related to that a little bit more. And as those stories kind of started to come out, and then I felt more comfortable sharing, those things too. And so, but I do think it was because I'd never really done anything like that, or like wrecked part of the car. And so I wasn't sure, and I wasn't, as confident just going to him right away.
That's a good moment for other parents to understand that even if a father particularly, doing everything good and right, there is still a chance that child would try to hide or not to go directly and continue to keep this good relationship, not because father did something wrong, but because of this, whatever, afraid of, who knows, never had such a big experience. So I guess it's good for fathers to know that don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Yes. Because, you didn't come to me first. Have I ever failed you? I never failed you. So don't take it personally, but be available and say, hey, let's work things out.
Yeah.
That's a good example.
Yeah, I understand. There's that like nervousness or a little
Yeah.
bit of that doubt, especially with like that new experience or things that have never happened before, and just not being sure, how he was going to respond. There's always that element.
Do you know about your grandfather, your father's father?
I do.
What kind of relationship did he learn from his father, or he had different experience in his life with his dad, with your grandfather?
So I think that, his personality in terms of that calm demeanor, definitely from his dad, and so I knew him and he lived until his mid-90s. He actually, so my grandfather, good, long, life, and ate healthy, walked a lot. He was really smart. He had a double doctorate actually in chemistry and then in soils. And so he was a professor, and then he also grew up on a farm. But I think a lot of what he did was just hard work and kind of instilled in my dad acts of service, in a lot of those ways, because, they would spend a lot of their free time helping other people or even fixing things for other people. And so a lot of the time, my dad would even go on vacation, but it was to a family's house. They'd have like projects for him to do when he got there. And it's almost like, well, you got to give him a little time to have vacation and then also, kind of fix these things around the house. But in terms of that relationship, I see it more similar, I guess, with my dad and his dad than with me and my son. Because my son and I feel like butt heads a little bit more than me and my dad do, because there is a personality difference.
That's interesting, because I'm trying to track this cycle, and it seems that from your grandfather to your father it was good, from your father to you it was good. It was the same good cycle, but you're saying that with your son it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think so.
We will talk about...
Not bad, but different.
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you think, what type of parenting style your father had?
So I think it was a lot of leadership by example, and then, listening and support. There are times where, if I were to get into trouble with some of these things, there was a lot of listening. He would take it in and then kind of decide on if there was going to be, a consequence or punishment. Obviously talking to my mom, and they'd kind of, figure that out if it was something bigger, like wrecking the car or, doing something like that. But he was very much so, I think, leadership by example, and then just there for us whenever we needed him. And he kind of was the more calm in the relationship. My mom was more like she would bring the hammer down if she needed to, and my dad would kind of like mitigate, the situation and kind of level the playing field, so to speak. And so, but yeah, my dad was just super supportive, and then also not as vocal. And so it was always like more by his actions, I would say, that he would lead.
Do you have any other example to share with us when he was supportive, when you, through his actions, he will back me up anytime? Any other example from your life? Some maybe...
Yeah, even more recently. So, my dad has always been there for us both, when it comes to finances or job or opportunities, and when we had been moving around a lot, it was one of those things like we weren't going to be able to afford the moving truck, and I didn't really have, too many connections where we moved from one of the times. And my dad flew out with me, and helped me pack up the house and load everything up, and rented the moving truck and helped us, when we really needed it, put everything together. And he's always been that way.
Mm-hmm. He was working at this time?
He was working.
So he needs to take a leave from his work to go and help you out.
Across the country, and more than once. Yeah, we moved five different states, and they weren't right next to each other. Mm-hmm. It was kind of across the country about 3 times, and just the adventure that we ended up going on for jobs and other reasons. But when we couldn't make it, he was there.
So he didn't tell you at the last one, hey guys, could you please slow down because I can't take so many.
After the 5th move, it was just a laugh, It was just kind of like, well, where are we going this time? It wasn't a question. It wasn't like, what are you doing or what are you thinking or what, it wasn't really like poking at the things that I could have done better. You know, it really was just, he's just there no matter what.
Have you ever had like deep conversation with your dad growing up, and maybe at your teenage years, or do you recall any situation when you would maybe like go hike and have some conversation about life, about challenges, or he was just by actions, by example, but not so much into deep conversation?
So I would say not so much into deep conversation. Like it really was something that we just didn't talk about much. You know, even when it came to relationships, there was one time, being a little vulnerable here, where I was dating a girl I probably should not have. And it was in high school, and I knew my mom like didn't approve of, you know, me dating this girl. And you know, my dad, we'd never really had those conversations of like, you know, who I should date or why he thought that was like a good or a bad idea. And my mom had always been really vocal. And so when my mom was like, oh, you shouldn't be dating this girl, I was like, okay, Mom, yeah, all right, whatever. But I think that, you know, there was an instance during that time where my dad was talking to me a little bit more like in depth, like you say. Maybe we had more serious conversation. But because we had never really talked about it that much, like the impact of his words like meant more to me and what he thought about that relationship. So I knew that if my dad didn't think it was a good idea and my dad didn't approve of it, you know, at least at that point in time, I felt like, okay, I really need to consider this, or I really need to take to heart what he's saying, because we didn't always have, you know, those real in-depth conversations. And so after that, you know, and talking to him a little bit more and realizing like, yeah, I was young and I still just wanted to date this girl, but it made me think twice. And eventually I did end up moving on and breaking up with her. And I think it did have to do with just, you know, like having more of a conversation with my dad, because he didn't often get to that, you know, level of the conversation. Yeah.
Do you think it was something that you would miss and you prefer him to have more of those, or you even didn't think about it? You didn't miss this deep conversation with your dad growing up?
So that's a great question. I actually thought about that a little bit because I was wondering if you were going to ask. And because I do things a little bit differently, you know, with my son. I'm a little bit more open. You know, I can talk about those things a little bit easier. And like by no means do I think that my dad did anything wrong in this instance, but there were times I feel like he would have, I almost like wish or had hoped he would have spoken his mind a little bit more, just because I knew he had more wisdom to offer, but he didn't always take it, like we were talking just a minute ago about, he didn't take it to the depth all the time, you know, that I feel like would have been valuable for me. You know, I feel like it could have been valuable for me to hear that from him when it came to, you know, like career choices, or when it came to like relationships or different values or difficult decisions, because I think I would have listened. You know, I would have really taken it to heart, especially coming from him. And so I do think I would have felt like if he would have just kind of, you know, given me a little bit of advice here and there, a little bit more on certain things, I think it would have been helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good moment, I guess, to say that the goal of this program is not to judge anybody. And obviously, we understand that, oh man, we all coming from different backgrounds. Some had much better start point, some not. And when we talk about experience, the goal is to think what we can do better. We all have room to improve and to grow. If your father will be watching, I'm sure, I hope he wouldn't be offended. It's not to put anybody down, but just to try to improve and do better. I understand that it's probably impossible to be the best in everything. You know, you cannot be the best in fixing, about best in talking to people, about best in math and sports. And usually we have some skill that we are talented in, and this is our strengths, and some are our weaknesses, and which is okay. However, if it's possible, this is the goal of this podcast, the goal of this interview is to identify our weaknesses and help each other through sharing personal experience to improve. as fathers?
Yeah. And I know there's things that, I feel like my dad did, better than I'm doing right now, right? As a dad. And then there's things I'm trying to just use that experience and learn from him and the things that I really appreciated. And I think doing this interview is great because it kind of helps me think about those things a little bit more. And I really am blessed, obviously to have the father that I have. And so being able to learn from him, and I know that he did an amazing job, and I'm just trying to, learn from others, be around, dads that are trying to lead their families well. And so I think that absolutely I have room to grow, but there's a lot that I learned from my dad that I really do incorporate into my own family life.
And we talk about father's influence because this is one of the biggest figure that influence the life of a child is a father. And especially, I think, I might be wrong, especially a boy. Because from my understanding, from my perspective, girls are usually leaning more and learning more from mom, and boys leaning and learning more from their dad. So father's influence has a tremendous impact. So talking about your dad, what is the biggest lesson you learned from your dad? I know there is a lot, but if you could choose one, probably the most significant.
Oh man, I think one of the biggest ones is just perseverance. Because there's going to be obstacles and trials and things are going to get hard, and it's what you do in those moments, to keep going. And it doesn't matter, if we come from all different backgrounds, right? But just kind of taking that ownership for what you do and responsibility for your own actions and finding the best way forward and just being able to do the right thing, even when it's hard.
Question related to this.
Yeah.
If ever happened that your father was wrong in something, did he ever come to apologize, or he would just be quiet about it? Do you recall any situation in that regard?
Yeah, I don't remember a lot of times my dad being wrong, or I never felt like he wronged me in any way. But with little things, or say something happens in sports, or even something that happens where, it's a difficult situation that we're going through potentially, together. He was always pretty quick to apologize or say sorry. Like, I don't remember that necessarily. And maybe it was hard for him, but I don't remember it being hard for him, or for that being something that was, a difficult or a challenging thing.
Observing him as a father growing up, because as kids, we observe our parents.
Yeah.
Observing him while he was growing up, what do you think was the biggest challenge for him as a father?
I think, and we've talked about this, as I've gotten older.
You talk with him?
With my dad, yeah. And so I'm knowing a little bit about more of the background, because we've had our own financial challenges. And when we were young, they had their own as well. And so things that I didn't necessarily notice as a kid. So I think, my parents did a great job just not talking about that around us. I think that's important. But I think one of his biggest challenges was just that, like, financially early on. I know they had some struggles, and then being able to always kind of do the things he wanted to do with us and be able to, like, he commuted an hour for work, and sometimes in Southern California, when you're driving an hour, it's going to be 2, or it's going to be, longer. And so we lived about an hour away from where he was working a lot of the time. And I remember he'd get home pretty late, and I wouldn't necessarily always get to see him or spend maybe as much time with him as he would have hoped potentially. And so I know that was probably a challenge, because I imagine, like, what it would be for me if that was a working situation, because I love being there for my kids. And so not being able to, because he was such a family guy too, in terms of being a dad, and wanted to be able to spend quality time. I think, that's one of his big love languages, is just like quality time and acts of service. Like, that is my dad for sure. And so missing out on some of that stuff, or not being able to, I think was a big challenge. And then,
so that's the way how he expressed his love as well, by spending time with you. You mentioned earlier that he would play games, sports games, and even if he didn't know anything or about specific game, he would learn just in order to spend time with you for this game.
We're going to figure it out. Yeah. He definitely went all the games that he could. You know, he went to my games in terms of when I was getting a little bit older and playing in leagues for basketball or football or anything like that. He was there. I still can't beat him at ping pong. Mm-hmm. He's always really good at ping pong. I remember having a ping pong table in the garage. We'd move everything out of the way and then, you know, play for, I remember sometimes hours, and still can't beat my dad at ping pong. So
was he the one who taught you to play the games like ping pong and other football? And yes,
I'd say for the most part. Yeah, I always learned from my dad first, and I had coaches as I got older. But yeah, you know, definitely dad was the one.
He would dedicate time. To teach you the games.
Shooting around for hours in the driveway if we, you know, had time to do it.
The car as well. Mm-hmm. He was the one who taught you to drive?
Yeah, he was the one that taught me to drive and then how to fix it, you know, and that was something we had to do. So
that's quite a bit of time together.
Yeah.
Learning to fix the cars, that's usually, it's not something that you go unscrew the bulb and screw it back in.
Yeah. Now, I don't know as much as he does either. So it was a lot of, you know, me helping him and changing the oil and doing a lot of the basic things. But yeah, I definitely learned that stuff from my dad. Nice.
You shared that your father was a very positive figure in your life. What do you think was the biggest influence, his influence on you who you are today?
I think there's a lot of character building in terms of, you know, what we were talking a little bit more with perseverance. You know, when things get hard and you just continue on and try to do the best you can and make the next right decision, you know. I think that his influence on me is a lot of how I want to show up for my kids. You know, I feel like, because when I think back to the memories of just being around my dad, like I love that about him, that he was able to play sports with me and that he was into what I was into and that he was encouraging, you know, and supportive, you know, and even with like the moves that we did or the job changes, you know, it wasn't judgment. It was just like, okay, well, all right, this is where we're at. How are we going to fix it? What are we going to do to make things right? Or how are we going to, you know, proceed or just move forward from here? And I think that's been a big influence on my life, you know, because when things go bad and things are going to go bad, it's like, what do you do in those moments? You know, you can't just kind of, you know, it's that never give up kind of attitude. And then just being there for my kids, like the way that he was, because when I think back to it, it was that quality time. You know, it didn't matter like if we were going on some crazy vacation or if we were just going to the park, you know, because spending time with my dad, kicking a ball around or being able to, you know, just play basketball or throw football, which is mostly what we, you know, did at the time. Like that's what I'm trying to do more with my kids. And that's the stuff they remember. You know, it's just so funny how that works out. It's like we'll take them on a vacation that might be something we think they're going to have more fun doing. And what's more impactful for them is, you know, these like just little silly things that we end up doing or exploring a new hike or going to a park in Canada with my son this last time. My wife's from Canada. So we went up there and we just took a football and they had a field goal at the park and we just kicked field goals for like an hour. You know, like that's what he remembers. And that was his best, you know, that was like the best day. It was just going out there kicking field goals with a real sized field goal, you know, just being outside. And so it's, I guess those lessons that, you know, I want to just be there for my kids and support them in what they're doing and encourage them, you know, and just like without the judgment. I don't want them to feel like anytime that they're in trouble, I don't want them to be nervous to come to me. And I wasn't ever nervous except for that one time when I ran that car off the road. I wasn't nervous to go to my dad. You know, I could tell him with just knowing that he wasn't going to immediately judge me for what I did. And I think that just was huge because it opened up that line of communication. And you know, that's what I would say. It's like, that's what I try to do for my kids is just reserve like any kind of emotion or, you know, snap judgment on something maybe they made a poor decision in so that they always feel comfortable to communicate. They always know that they can come to me because I'm going to just be that steady, calm presence. And we're going to figure out together. It's like, hey, you know, I know that was wrong or, you know, that was wrong. and let's figure out, now what we need to do to kind of fix it.
So you gradually kind of like shifted the conversation toward you as a father.
Yeah, I feel like it's just kind of...
That's a good moment. What do you think, if you will look from a side on yourself, what kind of father you are right now?
That's a good question. It's hard to do that kind of like self-evaluation sometimes. The kind of father I am, I'd say I am definitely on the encouraging side of things. Like even before I had kids, I was a coach and then worked at summer camps and did a lot of stuff that, is along those lines of just really encouraging and supporting, whether it's with sports or, school or really anything activity wise, just really trying to be there for my kids, to know that I'm with them or behind them. I'm also a little bit more vocal than my dad and stern. I feel like I get that probably from both my parents, being a mix of both of them, maybe being a little bit more outspoken about things, and then try to remember that I also need to be calm and reserved. And, there's a time and a place for that, because my son doesn't respond to that as easily, for sure. But the kind of father I am, just doing my best to lead by example, to be able to have my actions speak louder than my words. Because I feel like it's more important what you do than what you say, because that's what your kids see and remember, a lot of the time.
This is the biggest focus of yours, which is as a father to have good actions and that let them speak louder than words.
Yeah. And I want to be a man of my word. What I say goes, in terms of what I say I'm going to do, like I'm going to do. Like my kids know that I will follow through. And
it's good or bad, but
good or bad, they know I will follow through. And so when they're doing something they shouldn't, and my wife says, well, dad's going to come and he's going to, take care of this issue, do what needs to be done, like they'll know that if dad's going to step in, there's like, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. And so you better shape up and you better kind of get things in order, or else there is going to be a consequence. And so good or bad, like you said, like I want to be a man of my word. I want them to know that I'm going to follow through. But like you said, I mean, that could be good or bad. So it's not just on the punishment side of things, but when I tell them I'm going to be there for something, that I'm going to be there. When I tell them I'm going to help them with something, I'm going to help them. I tell them that we're going to be able to go do an activity in the afternoon, or we're going to go to the park. Like, even if I get caught up maybe doing something that I know needs to be done, that I can set it aside because I have told them, that we're going to do that activity. So I'm also careful to not like overpromise or tell them we're just going to do these things, because I don't want it to ever get to the point where that feels watered down and it just doesn't have any impact. And so I'm also careful with my words in that regard.
You was talking about punishment and correction. What type of punishment and correction do you use for your children?
So it's kind of evolved, certainly a little bit, as our kids are about 8 and 9 now. So it was really difficult early on, for my son to be able to reason with him. And so a lot of the times we just need to step away. And so we'll often give them a little bit of time and space, and so if we catch them doing something that they're not supposed to, they get in trouble. Often we'll just kind of like remove from the situation. My son will spend a little bit of time in his room. We'll have a conversation, but just really asking, prompting, like, do you understand like what you did or why you're here, and try to help them, through that thought process with where they're at, and then be able to just acknowledge, one way or the other that was right or wrong. And then, there is a consequence, whether they're going to have to do a chore, but they always have to make it right. So if it's between like him and his sister, so I have a boy and a girl, son's 8 and my daughter is 9. He has to be able to apologize to her. And he has a really hard time with that. And I know that can be difficult for a lot of us. And so for him, it's even if he writes a note, that's fine. It doesn't have to be like he verbally says it, but we try to find ways to make it a little bit easier so that he can do that. Our daughter wants to please. she doesn't get in trouble a whole lot. She'll look after her brother, and she's very much like my wife in that way, like caring and puts others before herself and is really sensitive and almost like feeling like their emotions are her emotions. When they're upset, she's upset. And so she's always, kind of wanted to please, but it's the same process. We make sure that we give them a little bit of time and space if they need it. Because my son, so my background's a little bit, I'm mostly Ukrainian, and my wife is 100% Portuguese. And our son ended up with this Ukrainian stubbornness and this Portuguese fire. And both of them just like come out sometimes. So he is the most stubborn kid I feel like I've ever met. And he's got this fire to him. And so if we get in this like tension where we're, kind of battling a little bit, it goes nowhere, and that's what's different between him and I and like my dad and I, because man, he will argue until there's just no reasoning. This is the way it is. I could tell you this shirt is green, and if he thought it was red and he wanted to say that, he would argue that it was red, even if he can see that it's green. Like, he will not back down. And so that's where it was kind of like this, kind of evolution, or at least learning how he deals with, that confrontation, and then fully understanding that it's just a different way of resolution, for him, and finding that he just kind of cools off, for a few minutes and has that time. Like, a lot of times he'll come around, and it's easier for him than it is me. He'll forget it like that, and then we'll be going outside to like play ball or whatever, and it's like he's completely forgotten about it. But for me, I used to like take that a lot heavier, just with some of the words that he would say. Because sometimes, kids can be kind of mean, when they're talking back with them, they don't mean it. They don't understand, I don't think, the gravity of what they say. When they're like, "You're the worst dad ever," or they say, "You don't, I don't love you." Not that they've said that, I guess, but, they'll just say, "You're the worst, and I don't know why you're, making me do this." And, I feel like I took that to heart a little bit more, especially as a young dad. But it's definitely gotten better as, we've learned how he responds to communication, to be able to communicate with him better, and to be able to just give him his time to cool off, and then be able to have just a real conversation. And the other thing that we do sometimes is, like, if I'm in there and he's not responding to me, is like my wife and I will just kind of like pass it off and be like, "All right, you go talk to him. I think he needs you, and he just needs kind of a different approach." And sometimes she can talk to him a little bit easier than I can, depending on what it is. And same with our daughter. If we need to kind of do a handoff, we'll do a handoff, and we both kind of communicate that to each other, like away from, the situation. And so it's not like we're doing it in the room when I'm talking to him and she just steps in, right? So we're outside the room and we're talking to each other and be like, "Okay, I think, definitely he could use like, his mom right now," and just kind of talking to him.
Where did you learn this skill?
So, honestly, that was probably from, like, I've read some different parenting books and certainly talked to some different friends and mentors. I think that's one of the things that I thought about in this whole situation too, is being able to find, maybe a mentor where you see that they've really done well to lead their family and they have great relationships with their kids. I think that is an awesome resource, because I feel like we learned that strategy from a mentor, from another parent that's further ahead than we are. They have like teenagers and they're in a different phase. And so if you can find somebody that's gone through these similar challenges and you feel like, man, they have such a great family dynamic, or they have a really good relationship with their kids, like, ask. See if there's something that you're struggling with, just be able to, see if there's anything that they've done that you feel like you can use. And that was one of those things.
So you were kind of like more intentional father. You study about it.
Yeah, I like to read. Uh-huh. So certainly.
That's a good approach. Talking about, you call it stubbornness, a little bit of stubbornness of the son, and trying to understand him, who he is.
Yeah.
Find a way to his heart to reach him, not to break him, and not to allow him just to do whatever he wants to do.
I do not want to break that spirit, right? We just want to direct it in a positive way and learn how to navigate that and help him understand it too. Yeah.
It's easy to go into either extreme, or try to break him and just to follow the line and do what I said, or whatever, that's his character. Let's encourage him to be a good leader and let him, continue argue and win over, and sometimes even go to disrespect. And parents, and just in general, be so self-confident that he can do whatever, but find a proper balance, how to correct and polish. That's a good skill to defend your opinion. If it's a worthy opinion, if it's a good one, yes, you need to learn how to defend. However, do it not so much emotionally, but more logically and with respect.
And that's just it. Is they know there's certain rules, like within our family. It's like you can't cross that line, right? Like you can't disrespect your mom. You can't blatantly just disrespect her or myself. And we don't lie, right? There's certain principles that we establish within our home that are our family values that they know, if they do one of those things, they've crossed a line.
And what will happen if they will cross the line? What would be the result? Maybe a specific situation.
For my son, it works more with just physical labor, and boys, I feel respond to that, right? We've got to be physical, and we've got to work with our hands, and whether it's cleaning out the garage, or it's helping me with a project, or it's making sure he's working hard at something so that he understands that there is this, consequence. He doesn't like to do it, but just kind of getting out there and being able to, make it right, in some way or another. And you have to learn that. And just like you said, it's a skill to be able to find that balance, and then what resonates and works for your kid. And that was a process, early on, even with him. And as he's gotten older, it's definitely been a process, learning what he responds to and learning how to navigate these things. I don't want to break his spirit. I want him to have that fire and that stubbornness, because it works really well in other avenues. He stands up for what he believes to neighborhood kids that are older than him. Doesn't matter. He'll tell them what's right and what's wrong. And so for that, it's that's a proud moment. And so I don't want to break that spirit, because it's going to serve him well, as long as we're finding that balance and then encouraging it in a healthy way, for sure.
You mentioned that you read a lot. You was preparing yourself for the fatherhood, for parenting.
Yeah.
What was the biggest surprise for you while you was preparing, and when you start practicing fatherhood? What is maybe so far the biggest surprise for you?
I think the biggest surprise was the different family dynamic. I had an older sister, and when I was growing up, I was more along the lines of I wanted to please, and my sister too, and I did get in trouble a lot, and my wife, it was kind of the same family dynamic. She was the older sister, had a younger brother. They got along pretty well. And so I guess that was my expectation, is that, we had a girl and a boy, and it was kind of the same, and everybody's going to get along, and not they get along really well. They do as siblings. But again, my son is different in terms of personality. And so it was a huge challenge early on to be able to learn that and to navigate it and to be able to identify and cultivate that healthy relationship within that family dynamic, because ours is definitely different than I would say mine was with my family, and my wife's was with her family growing up. And so that was one of the biggest, surprises. Other than that, I gotta say, finding out that my wife was pregnant was definitely a surprise, and both of our kids were surprises. So we were in the middle of building a practice when we found out that my wife was pregnant, and it was just oh man, I don't even know how to navigate. I don't even know how to think about this right now. Excited and scared and all of those things that come along with it. And so, it's always hard because you're never really ready, or at least, people say that you're not really ready, but I felt very not ready in that moment. And so just the surprise of, having kids. Other than that, I don't know if I could really speak to a big surprise necessarily.
Did you go to delivery?
I did. Mm-hmm.
Did you participate?
I did. Yeah.
What was your experience with your firstborn? It was a girl. Can you recall and share with us your feelings, emotions?
Yeah, I still remember it. And I think for me, my wife, obviously being pregnant, feels that connection right away, because she's kind of feeling the baby move, and And then as the baby's growing, in her belly, she just has almost that immediate connection. And I remember holding, my daughter for the first time and looking down at her and feeling like this very surreal moment that I loved this baby almost more than anything, but I didn't even really know her or know who she was or the personality that she was going to have. It was just that I knew that I just loved her so much, right? And so it was a very full moment, but it was just that surreal, it was a different kind of a feeling because, not knowing this person or who they are, what their personality is going to be or their character, but still feeling just that love for the baby, and my daughter.
Immediate bond. You don't know where it came from, but
exactly.
And a little bit of a, I don't know how you would describe it, frustration because you don't know who it is, or how you would
excited anticipation, right? And just nervous, maybe a little bit, am I going to be a good dad? I hope I can, live up to the father that I had, because I had an amazing example as a dad. So just, all those feelings of just wanting to be, a great dad and hoping I could live up to that.
Is it the biggest hope that you want to pass to your children, that you are doing your best to be the father, or any other hope that you have that you want to pass to your children?
I hope, that honestly, some of those values we were talking about earlier that can be instilled in them, to do right, even when it's hard, that they do the right thing, to be able to keep going when life gets hard, to perseverance and build that into their character, to be able to channel, that energy into something positive in terms of my son just having that, fire in him and maybe being a little bit more stubborn, but then also, create encouragement, and make sure that they know that we're always going to be there for them and that they know that they can come to us with anything. And I hope that, they have a lot of those characteristics. I feel like that, my father, for me, since we're talking about influence, I feel like I really got a lot of those things from him. And I want to be able to pass on, those same things to my kids. And then maybe take some of those things, where I can, like we were saying, maybe we can improve on them and just make sure that they know they have an open line of communication, with me, that they can come to me with anything and talk about anything. And whether it's, we're talking about God, or we're talking about relationships, or we're talking about career choices and maybe difficult decisions that they have, as best I can, I want to be able to offer what wisdom I do have on those things with the way that I've seen, them develop and grow, to make my best effort at giving them good advice on those things. Because I think that our parents certainly have a unique perspective watching us grow up and seeing the character develop and seeing the talents that we have and the skills that we have. And I remember a book that I was reading, and one of the things that comes to mind with what we're talking about here is that the son didn't really know what he wanted to do. And, the father basically was like, well, is it okay if I give you some advice, here in this career, just because of, knowing his son and the things that he liked and, how things were going? It's like, why don't you go into this career path? And the son was like, took his father's advice and did it and ended up doing very well and being very happy for a long time in that career. And I think sometimes that's hard to do, right? Because especially with things like career and relationships, people like to say, well, you don't know until you know, right? With relationships or with the career, sometimes it's really difficult to make that decision. And I think that if you do, have a relationship with your kids in that way, and you've watched them grow and you understand their personality, and you've made the effort to really be able to connect with them, and then it's a little bit not easy, but it gives you more insight onto how you can help them make those decisions and maybe direct them as best you can on the right path.
Having a boy and a girl.
Yeah.
Do you see that you, as a father, approach them differently?
Yeah.
In what way?
So, I think both personality-wise, and then kind of what they respond to. The girl, I definitely feel like I would just go to war for her and fight whatever battle I needed to protect her, in that regard. And my son, I want him to be a little bit tougher, growing up, being able to fight his own battles to a certain extent. But I think one of the things I've learned about having a daughter is I want her to see how respectful I am in treating my wife, because I want her to see that relationship and understand that she should look for somebody, if it's God's plan for her life, to, meet somebody to marry someday. I want her to be able to know what it looks like to have a healthy relationship, and that she should be treated with kindness and respect and with love. And just being able to have at least, in some part, to show that example, with the relationship that I have with my wife, I think is really important. And then being, there for her if she wants to talk to me about any of those things, like I'm happy to too. But definitely it's more of that protective nature when it comes to my daughter. And it's wanting to, almost fight her battles for her. So a lot of times I have to make sure that I'm also letting her learn and do those things with my wife. I'm sure keeps me in check for. And then my son, it's like, I want him to know that he should be taking care of like the women in our family, right? Setting that example of respect from that standpoint too, having a son, so that he's treating his sister well and he's treating his mom well. And he knows that, when I'm gone, he's the man of the house and he's the one that needs to kind of like step up and take charge, not necessarily take charge, but be the man of the house in the sense that he's protecting them as he gets older and looking out for them, really just looking out for them and making sure that he's there for them. And hopefully I'm around for a good long time, but I want him to know, like, just have that example too, where he's taking care of, his mom and his sister.
What is your biggest challenge as a father? Maybe both, and father for a girl and father for a boy, or just in general. What is the biggest challenge that you face being a father?
Sometimes I think letting them learn the hard way a little bit, but within reason.
Can you give an example?
That one's kind of tough. I feel like we're just getting into the stages of where they're developing more friendships and like meeting more kids. And so not wanting to protect them too much from the world. Mm-hmm. Obviously there's things that we don't want them to see or get involved with at this stage. Mm-hmm. But I feel like my wife and I have been kind of reading different books and going through different resources because they're exposed to a lot now, right? Whether it's through phones, the internet, what they even show on TV,
kids,
other kids, neighbors. And so, we do certainly want to protect them at the age that they are and be appropriate that way. But we don't want to be overprotective. And I think that can kind of also be a big challenge because I want them to be able to navigate difficult situations without me always, stepping in. And without always just kind of being there to like put them in bubble wrap. Like I don't also want to be that dad either. And so sometimes I think the challenge for me is, for one, learning how to discipline well and, not overstep and encourage, the healthy development of those characteristics like we were talking about. And then, letting them make mistakes sometimes is hard so that they can learn.
Do you have any example that you can share with us about letting them have a mistake and learn?
Well, so a little, maybe just for my son using a hatchet or a pocket knife, mm-hmm. Things like that, making sure that he's cutting away from himself, but, telling him that like, if this is something that he's going to have and he can be responsible with it, then he can have his own. So I kind of let him borrow one of mine for a while mm-hmm. and let him use it. And as long as he can show me that he's responsible with it, and there's times where he's not responsible with it. Thankfully, he hasn't hurt himself too bad with it yet, but letting him make some mistakes and letting him have more responsibility as he gets older, and it's kind of the same, for my daughter too. So far, I mean, honestly, she's kind of the easier one and she wants to please. And so the things that we notice more with her kind of taking on characteristics or being around kids and then having a lot of attitude and things like that. So it's a little bit different than what we're talking about here. But in terms of making mistakes, I feel like that's really one of the more recent things, I guess, example wise, is, I want him to be able to explore and be a kid and learn and develop these different skills, fully knowing that he can either cut himself or do some damage with it.
Did he cut himself?
He thankfully hasn't yet. So
are you ready?
I'm okay with it.
Potentially he might. Hopefully he wouldn't cut it off completely.
Hopefully he's not gonna. That's just it. It's like I let him explore and let him run around and let him kind of just be a kid and but just being okay with a certain level of that. Obviously within certain parameters. I'm not just going to let him go crazy with it, but making sure that I'm just not, stepping in too often or being too overbearing, and making sure that they can have increased levels of responsibility as they get older, that match the age that they're in. And then, other than that, I think that's just kind of a challenge, is just kind of letting them grow up.
What is the biggest reward you experienced so far being a father?
I think the moments of accomplishment for your kids. Like when...
Can you give specific examples?
Yes, I can. And it is this church league soccer that, we play in together. And I remember my son, he's just really reserved, when he plays. Especially he gets intimidated when older kids are out there playing. And this is his first year playing. And so he's pretty new, honestly, to the sport, which, that's totally fine, and get that too. But you kind of see it. You kind of see it where he's kind of learning and he's gaining some skills here and there. And it's not all the time, but I think it was a few weeks ago. And one of the other dads was down the sideline, and he was basically going to cross the ball to the middle where my son was, and everybody was playing, and my son got into the right position, and he crossed the ball, and my son hit it hard and just buried it in the back of the goal. And that was just a proud moment. It's one of those things where it's just like he was excited, and seeing the joy, on his face. It's just priceless, right? Like that feeling is just a priceless thing when it comes to seeing the accomplishment in your kids. And with our daughter, it was actually one of the times she was at a school event, and she had raised her hand. She's usually really shy. She had raised her hand, gone up front, and was speaking in the microphone. And my wife and I didn't even realize it. And it sounded like her. And we were like, is that Kaylin? Is she up there speaking? And sure enough, like she was up front on stage, like speaking into the microphone. And it was like, we didn't even know that she had it in her. But I feel like those, proud moments, when they accomplish something new, or they learn a new skill, or they, stand up for themselves in a situation where, they are running into the neighborhood kids. And my son's done that multiple times where he'll tell them, it's like, we don't do that, or, it's not right because of this reason. And then he'll stand up for himself. And so those moments too, I really proud of him for that.
What do you think when your children will grow up? How they will, if they would have, your son would have interview, let's say, 30 years from now, what kind of description he would say about his father?
Man, hopefully good things. No, I think that it's just that I was always there for them and encouraging. I'd always take time out of my day and make sure that we got quality time. Like we'll do these things where even if we just get 15 minutes, we'll make sure at the end of the day, my wife will kind of have 15 minutes with, say my daughter first, then I'll have 15 minutes with my son individually, and then we'll switch. Mm-hmm. And so they know that they're getting quality time with us, and they get to choose what we do. So they're kind of like the boss of that 15 minutes, and that's like one of their favorite things to do. Mm-hmm. And it just, I hope that they feel like I was encouraging, I was supportive. They know that I'm there for them. They can come to me with anything. And honestly, too, that I put God first in my life. That's a big thing for us in our family, and we worship together. That I'm doing the best that I can to lead my family well in that way. And that they see me being mindful and prayerful and studying my Bible. So leading by example in that way, is very important in our family. And I want them to also have their own personal relationship with God. And so we make sure that we have worship as a family, but they also have like their own Bible and their own little worship books that they can read too.
What you would say to all fathers who are watching this interview?
Man, I'd say one of the things that came to mind was just having a mentor, really somebody that is ahead of you. It could be that their kids are 3-4 years older. It could be that they already have kids that are in college and their kids still want to hang out with them, once they've gone away to college or once they're in high school. Like, find a mentor in your community, church family, anybody that you feel has the type of relationship that you want with your kids, and just ask. I feel like that's such a hard thing for us to do as guys. And that's something that was so hard for me to do for a long time. But you'd be surprised at, if you just go up to somebody and you're like, hey, I noticed that you just seem to have a great relationship with your son, or you have a great relationship with your daughter. What's made the difference for you? What are some of the 3 biggest things that you would recommend in terms of how you built that relationship? In high school, why do your kids still want to hang out with you? I want my kids to still want to be around me in high school and college. And I think that's a big part of it, is just finding a mentor, somebody that can help, when you have questions or you're not really sure what to do, because books are great. And there's, sometimes, books that resonate with some people more than others, but really having a community or somebody that you can go to as a mentor is huge, just so that you can ask them questions and go to coffee or go to lunch or do something. And that could be even every other week or once a month. I have people that I hang out with, probably about that, like once every other week or once a month, and we get together and we talk about our struggles and our challenges and what we're faced with any given day. And having somebody to talk to about that kind of stuff is huge. The other thing I would say is take time to listen to and really learn your kids. Right? Because for me, it was way different. Me growing up as a kid and my relationship with my dad. And I kind of had that expectation that it would be similar. We'd get along and everything would be great. And we do get along. Mm-hmm. But there's also times where, like, my dad and I never, ever had like these debates where we would go back and forth. And early on, when I was trying to learn my son, we would get at it, and I had to step out of the room, and my wife had to step in. And so taking the time to learn how they respond, to learn how, they respond to discipline or different forms of, those consequences that they might have to, make right with you or your wife or your, their siblings or whatever the case may be. But take time to listen. Most people end up talking a lot more, I feel like, than they should, and a lot of relationships. And I feel like that can be the case because we want to tell our kids what to do, and we want to, tell them the right things, and we want to, always have these, if you do this, then that, or if you do this, then that. And rather than, putting these ultimatums on our kids, we've tried to really step away from doing that. They do have consequences for their actions, but we don't use it as a threat. We don't say like, oh, if you do this, it's going to be, leading to this consequence. Like, that has never worked well for our kids. And so just taking the time to learn your kids, to listen to them. And for my son, in order to get him to talk, we've got to be doing something. I can't go to him like, we're sitting here now and be like, what's going on? Tell me your big feelings that you're having today. They'll be like, nothing. But if you can get them out kicking a ball or running or going for a walk or building Legos or, it can be anything. If you can just kind of get them a little bit active, then you can talk to them. Then you can get them to open up and then, kind of share what's on his mind. And so that's, I guess, the 2 biggest things that come to mind for me is get a good mentor, somebody that's been there and has that type of relationship that you want with your kids to talk to. And then, listen and learn your kids and what they respond to and just what seems to work best for them, because, it can be different than maybe even right now, and it's going to change. As my kids get older, I'm fully expecting that to change and how they communicate, and then just being able to be adapt to it and be a little bit flexible that way.
Thank you. What you would share with sons if you would approach a son? I know that it's very broad. Some had good experience with that, some bad, but
sure.
No matter of experience, as a son, in your relationship with your father, what you would suggest, recommend, say to other sons in their relationship with their fathers?
I think that, part of it is just to give them a little bit of grace. A lot of times dads like to put on that front, and not open up, a lot of ways or talk about their feelings. That can be certainly tough. And I know that's me too. To maybe just have a little bit of grace and be patient, and just being able to do that for your dad. And, it goes a long way too, to just check in with your dad and see how he's doing.
Yes.
To see how his day went, and to see, if there's anything that he wants to do, because a lot of times for me too, going out and kicking a ball is the exact thing I need to just kind of clear my head and get some fresh air, going on a hike. And when my son asks if I want to do something like that, and, puts out that invitation, and he just asks if there's something, that we can go do together, it means a lot. Mm-hmm. Like the words, mean a lot, and just the fact that he wants to come to me and spend time, and even just being encouraging, in different ways, and just being thankful or grateful, for the things that your dad does for you. I mean, that's huge. It doesn't have to be that you're saying a lot of words. Just be like, I really appreciate, Dad, you come to my game, or, just you being willing to drive me to my practices, or, thanks, Dad, for just the things that you do. Maybe as simple as that.
Completely agree with you. Thank you, Brian.
Yes.
It was my pleasure to spend time with you.
My pleasure too. Thank you, Alexander.